The Iliad by Homer, published by Penguin Classics. The Greeks believed that the Iliad was composed by Homer. In our ignorance of the man, his life and his work, we are free to believe it or not. Received opinion dates him to about 750 to 700 years before the Common Era, before Christ, and places him in Ionia, the Greek-inhabited coast, and islands off central western Turkey. The Greeks believed the same man composed the Odyssey. E.V. Rieu, editor of the Penguin Classics from 1944 to 1964, was a scholar of St. Paul's School and Balliol College, Oxford. He joined Methuen in 1923 and was managing director from 1933 to 1936, and then academic and literary advisor. He was president of the Virgil Society in 1951, and vice president of the Royal Society of Literature in 1958. He was awarded an honorary doctorate in literature by Leeds University in 1949 and the CBE in 1953. Among his publications are The Flattered Flying Fish and Other Poems, translations of the Odyssey, the Iliad, Virgil's pastoral poems, The Voyage of the Argo by Apollonius of Rhodes, and the Four Gospels of the Penguin Classics. He died in 1972. And he translated, here we are, the Iliad. This version was translated by E.V. Rieu of Great Britain. Here is our table of contents. Here's the copyright of E.V. Rieu's translation and other information. This book was printed in England. And this is what we'll read today. Just for the beginning, we're going to read the introduction as best as we can. The Greeks looked on the Iliad as Homer's major work. It was the story of Achilles and not the wanderings of Odysseus, as might have been expected, that Alexander the Great took with him as a bedside book on his adventurous campaigns. I myself used not to accept this verdict, and I felt that many modern readers would agree with me. It was therefore with some trepidation that I bade farewell to the Odyssey and braced myself for the task of translating the Iliad, which I had not read through as a whole for 12 years. I soon began to have very different feelings, and now that I have finished the work, I am completely reassured. The Greeks were right. It is a question not of any difference in skill, but of artistic levels. The Odyssey, with its happy ending, presents the romantic view of life. The Iliad is a tragedy. And a note on this, I am not implying in what follows that we really know which of them Homer wrote first. To paint the Odyssean picture convincing, just as beautiful as it is, Homer took his easel to the lower slopes of Mount Olympus, which are pleasant, green, and wooded. It was a good spot for the Muses, certainly to come down and play there. But to compose the Iliad he moved higher up the mountainside, nearer to the eternal snows and the very homes of the Muses and the other gods. From there, he had a different and a clearer view of the same landscape. Some of the mists had dissolved. The sun beat pitilessly on the snow, and a number of new things, many of them very terrible and lovely, came into sight. Homer himself became, if possible, even more human. He had climbed high. He had faced and solved some of the ultimate enigmas. And he could afford to smile both at the ant-like activities of men and the more awe-inspiring pageant of the gods. I am therefore very confident when I assure those who already know the Odyssey that they will be brought closer to tears of the death of a single horse in the Iliad than by the killing of the whole gang of suitors. Closer to laughter, and closer, if they follow Homer, to the Olympian eminence from which he looks out on the world, to the heights where tears and laughter cease to count. The plot of the Iliad is simple. King Agamemnon, the imperial overlord of Greece, or Achaea, or Homer, as Homer calls it, has, with his brother Menelaus of Sparta, induced the princes who owe him allegiance to join forces with him against King Priam of Troy, because Paris, one of Priam's sons, has run away with Menelaus's wife, the beautiful Helen of Argos. The Achaean forces have, for 9 years, been encamped beside their ships on the shore near Troy, but without bringing the matter to a conclusion, though they have captured and looted a number of towns in Trojan territory under the dashing leadership of Achilles, son of Peleus, prince of the Myrmidons, the most redoubtable and most unruly of Agamemnon's royal supporters. The success of these raiding parties leads to a feud between Achilles and his commander-in-chief. Agamemnon has been allotted the girl Chryseis as his prize, and he refuses to give her up to her father, a local priest of Apollo. When he comes to the camp with ransom for her release, the priest prays to his god. A plague ensues, and Agamemnon is forced by the strength of public feeling to give up the girl, and so propitiate the angry god. But he recoups himself by confiscating one of Achilles' own prizes, a girl named Briseis. Achilles, in high dudgeon, refuses to fight any more and withdraws the Myrmidon force from the battlefield. After an abortive truce intended to allow Menelaus and Paris to settle their quarrel by single combat, the two armies meet, and as a result, quarrel. And as a result of Achilles' absence from the field, the Achaeans, who have hitherto kept the Trojan forces penned up in Troy or close to their own city walls, are slowly but surely put on the defensive. They are even forced to make a trench and a wall around their ships and huts. But these defenses are eventually stormed by Hector, the Trojan commander-in-chief, who succeeds in setting fire to one of the Achaean ships. At this point, Achilles, who has remained obdurate to all entreaties, yields to the extent of permitting his squire and closest friend Patroclus to lead the Myrmidon force to the rescue of the hard-pressed Achaeans. Patroclus brilliantly succeeds in this mission, but he goes too far and is killed under the walls of Troy by Hector. This disaster brings Achilles to life. In an access of rage with Hector and grief for his comrade, he reconciles himself with Agamemnon, takes the field once more, hurls the panic-stricken Trojans back into their town, and finally kills Hector. Not content with his revenge, he savagely maltreats the body of the fallen enemy. Hector's father, King Priam, in his grief and horror, is inspired by the gods to visit Achilles in his camp by night in order to recover his son's body. And the note on this, the Achaeans attached even more importance than we do to the proper disposal of their dead. You can also see the ghost of Patroclus on this subject on chapter 23, page 414 of this book. Achilles relents, and the Iliad ends with an uneasy truce for the funeral of Hector. Such is the framework of the story. Unlike those who describe the plot of a thriller on its dust cover, I have disclosed the end. And I have done this with no fear of spoiling the tale in order to bring out the fact that the Iliad is a fine example of the Greek method of constructing a story or a play. In most cases, since the matter was traditional, the end was already known to the audience when they sat down to the beginning, and the author had to secure his effects by other methods than that of surprise. He could, of course, show a greater or lesser degree of originality in the details of his composition. In the Odyssey, for instance, it was a stroke of dramatic genius to break the narrative by causing Odysseus to recite his own adventures to the Phoenician nobles in the shadowy hall of King Alcinous. And in the case of the Iliad, Homer's first audiences must have been delighted by the daring humor with which he presented the comedy of Olympus, for I believe this has been one of his major contributions to the old story of the Trojan War. But apart from such innovations, Homer employs two devices, both of which are typical of Greek art. First, like the Attic dramatists, far from feeling that his hearers' foreknowledge is a handicap, he makes capital out of it by giving them confidential asides. The ominous remark that follows Hector's promise to Dolon of the horses of Achilles is a case in point. Again, the effect of the magnificent speech in which Achilles repudiates Agamemnon's overtures is heightened by the fact that Achilles really thinks that destiny leaves him free to go home unscathed, whereas we know that he will be dragged back into the war by the killing of his dearest friend, and in the end, or rather beyond it, will himself be killed. Which brings me to a further point. The action of the Iliad covers only 50 days in a 10 years war. but by a skillful extension of the device I am discussing, Homer causes two shadows to add their somber significance to every page. That of the past and that of what is yet to come. Secondly, Homer employs the device of delayed action. His hearers know what is coming, but not how or when. The sinister figure of Achilles is introduced at the beginning of the poem, but only to be withdrawn into the background till we reach Book 9. We are almost lulled into security, but not quite. There are too many references to the absentee for us to forget him. However, when Achilles does come into the foreground again, he removes himself once more with such a show of indomitable pride that we are left wondering how Homer is going to break this adamantine spirit. And we are not surprised to discover that it takes him 9 tremendous books to do so. The same artifice of suspense is used in the Odyssey. There, too, the chief figure is introduced in the beginning only to vanish and be talked about by other characters till he reappears in Book 5. Moreover, the parallel in technique extends to the conclusion of both works. In both, Book 22 brings the action to a climax. Hector is killed, the suitors are disposed of. In Book 23, we have a peaceful interlude, the funeral games. Odysseus is recognized by Penelope, and Book 24 provides the resolution of the drama. Achilles obeys the gods and relents. Odysseus is reinstated by divine intervention. This similarity in their composition is one of the many things which incline me to the opinion that one man is the author of both works. It will astonish people who know nothing of the Homeric question to learn that these splendidly constructed poems, and especially the Iliad, have in the past been picked to pieces by the men who studied them most carefully and should presumably have admired them most. They alleged certain incongruities in the narrative and argued that the Iliad is the composite product of a number of poets of varying merit who had not the doubtful advantage of sitting in committee, but lived at different times, and each patched up his predecessor's work, dropping many stitches in the course of this sartorical process. Now, I think it is generally admitted that Homer did not invent the story of Troy. Also, it was also the practice of ancient poets to build upon their own edifice, to build up their own edifice with the help of bricks taken from existing structures. In fact, we should expect the Iliad to contain quite clear indications that it is the last of a long line of poems. Like Hermes, as described by Priam, it bears every sign of good breeding and noble parentage. I have already referred to the evidence of advanced technique which I provided by certain elements in its construction, and I could add other points which in this latter days of literature we are too sophisticated to note with surprise or even to note at all. For instance, that in Homer it is already an established convention that the author has been put by his muse in a position to tell us everything his characters have said or thought, even their last soliloquies. If Homer invented all this technique, it would be more niggardly to deny him originality, but even if we take the likelier view that he inherited a great deal of it from previous poets, we have by no means shown that the Iliad was not his own. We are left to the end with one kind of evidence, and that is psychological. To me, the proof of unity afforded by Homer's consistency in character drawing is the most convincing of many. Note first that he does not describe his characters at length. He makes them disclose themselves by what they say and do in the scenes where they appear. We'll stop there for now. Here's the other pages. To continue reading more another time, here are the pages. Here are the pages. More pages. More pages. More pages. Just of the introduction. More pages. More. More. And lastly, it's signed by E.V. Ryu. He wrote that in Highgate, UK, 1949, and he even has a note after the 8th printing. All for now. And there we are. Chapter 1 will be called The Quarrel. Until next time.